Take this mop and clean the washrooms for minimum wage. Or pack your little handbag and leave with nothing.
Revoke her digital clearance. Escort her outside. She no longer works here.
We are waiting for the managing partner who holds 51% of equity and has final sign-off today. You offered me minimum wage to clean your floors, so I came here today to give my final answer.
I'm offering you a choice, darling. You can either pack your little handbag and leave with nothing, or you can take the mop, put on the yellow gloves, and clean the executive washrooms for minimum wage. At least that way, you'll still be able to pay your rent. The room erupted into harsh, mocking laughter. My sister-in-law leaned back in her leather swivel chair, her manicured fingers twirling a diamond necklace, a necklace paid for by the very company I had spent 6 years building from the ground up. Beside her, her younger sister giggled into her iced latte, snapping a photo of me with her phone. "Make sure you get her face," my sister-in-law sneered, signaling the 2 burly security guards standing by the glass doors. "We want everyone on LinkedIn to see what happens when an orphan thinks she can play with the big dogs." Without giving me a single second to collect my personal belongings, the guards grabbed my arms and escorted me toward the private elevator. The entire floor, employees I had hired, mentored, and protected, looked down at their desks in total silence. Nobody dared to meet my eyes. As the elevator doors glided shut, my sister-in-law blew me a fake kiss, keying the master remote to revoke my digital security clearance right in front of me. The lock on my phone clicked. Access denied. I stood on the icy pavement outside the steel and glass skyscraper, holding nothing but my coat. The security guards locked the revolving doors behind me and pulled down the blinds. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't throw a scene. Instead, I looked up at the top floor window, smiled softly, and whispered into the cold afternoon air, "Thank you." She had no idea what was coming. To understand how I ended up being tossed out of my own building like trash, you have to understand how a snake slides into a garden. 6 years ago, I launched a boutique biotech logistics firm. I poured every cent of my inheritance, every sleepless night, and every ounce of my soul into turning it into an empire. I wasn't interested in the spotlight. I loved the strategy, the operational architecture, and the ground-level work. When my brother married her 4 years ago, I thought our family was growing stronger. She was glamorous, sharp-tongued, and wildly ambitious. When my brother tragically passed away in a boat accident 2 years later, I was devastated. In my grief, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I welcomed her into the company to give her purpose, eventually naming her co-CEO to manage public relations while I handled operations. That was her first victory, and my first mistake. Over the next 18 months, she slowly began replacing key department heads with her own cronies. She bought off the board with inflated quarterly promises and whispered poisonous lies about my mental stability following my brother's death. She made sure I looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and unstable. Every time I tried to rein in her lavish company spending, she gaslit me in front of executive staff. Everyone in that building assumed I was weak because I stayed quiet. They mistook my patience for submission. They assumed that because she had the title, the press, and the board's voting proxy, she held all the cards. They forgot one tiny, crucial detail. Remember that detail. It matters later. The weeks following my public firing were brutal for the company, though the public didn't know it yet. My sister-in-law threw a massive celebration party in the penthouse suite, posting pictures holding a broom with the caption, "Out with the old dust, in with the gold." She thought she had stripped me of everything. She took my title, my salary, my stock options, and my reputation. She even convinced my late brother's extended family to cut all ties with me, framing me as an ungrateful wreck who tried to sabotage his legacy. Every day, her cruelty escalated. She sent corporate process servers to my apartment with baseless non-compete lawsuits. She had her sister post cryptic mocking videos online targeting my humble background. She was utterly intoxicated by her own power, entirely convinced that I was defeated, broke, and drowning in despair. She thought the game was over. In reality, the board pieces were just being set. The true test of the company's survival arrived 3 months later. The firm was facing a severe liquidity crisis due to her reckless expansion projects. The only thing that could save the business from total bankruptcy was a massive $50 million Series C investment deal with a consortium of international private equity titans. This deal was everything. If she secured it, she would solidify her status as a corporate prodigy. If she failed, the company would collapse into receivership, and she would face personal financial ruin from the personal guarantees she had foolishly signed to cover her debts. For weeks, her team prepared for the pitch. The meeting was set at the neutral, high-security summit headquarters of the city's largest venture capital firm. She spent $20,000 on a new custom suit just for the occasion. She brought her sister as her personal assistant, strutting into the glass-walled skyscraper with the arrogance of a queen about to claim her crown. What she didn't know was that the consortium wasn't just bringing money to the table. They were bringing their chief legal and restructuring advisors. At 10 a.m. sharp, my sister-in-law and her legal team sat on one side of the massive mahogany conference table on the 40th floor. Across from them sat three of her fiercest industry competitors, executives from firms she had publicly insulted just weeks prior. She smirked, leaning forward. "I didn't realize this was an open bid," she said condescendingly to the lead investor. "I was under the impression we were here to finalize terms, not to entertain bottom feeders." The lead investor didn't laugh. He simply sat with his hands folded, looking at his watch. "We are waiting for the managing partner of the umbrella fund. She holds 51% of the syndicate's voting equity and has final sign-off on all asset allocations." My sister-in-law waved her hand dismissively. "Of course, we have all afternoon." The double doors at the end of the boardroom swung open. A woman walked in, flanked by two top-tier corporate defense attorneys and a team of forensic accountants. She wore a tailored midnight blue suit, her hair pulled back into a crisp, immaculate knot. The room went dead silent. My sister-in-law stood up, her face draining of all color so fast she looked like a ghost. Her sister dropped her pen, the plastic clicking loudly against the polished floor. The smirk on my sister-in-law's face shattered into absolute, unadulterated horror. "It was me!" "What is this joke?" my sister-in-law gasped, her voice trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. "How did you get security clearance in this building?" "She's a former employee. She was terminated for incompetence. Guards." "Sit down," the lead investor said, his voice cold as ice. "You are speaking to the primary trustee of the private fund funding this entire restructuring." Nobody in that room knew the truth, until that exact second. When I founded my company 6 years ago, I didn't structure my ownership through standard equity shares that a rogue board could vote away. I structured the core intellectual property, the operational software patents, and the primary logistics hardware under an independent, blind offshore trust created before my brother ever met her. The company she thought she owned was merely a shell leasing the rights to my technology. When she fired me and offered me a janitor's mop 3 months ago, she broke the master service covenant of that trust. By locking me out, she triggered a default clause that automatically transferred $40 million of corporate debt directly onto her personal liability ledger and granted my private trust absolute acquisition rights over her firm's remaining assets for the sum of exactly $1. I sat down at the head of the table, opening a sleek leather binder. I didn't glare at her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her with calm, unshakable authority. "You offered me minimum wage to clean your floors," I said softly, the words echoing through the silent boardroom. "I'm here to give you my answer." The collapse was instantaneous and absolute. I pushed a document across the table. It wasn't an investment agreement. It was an immediate notice of default and foreclosure, backed by the 3 competitors sitting right beside me, who had already signed agreements to absorb her supply chains. Her lead attorney took one look at the documents, turned pale, and leaned over to whisper in her ear. Her eyes widened in sheer panic. She dropped back into her chair, her breathing shallow, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't even pick up her glass of water. You sabotaged me," she stammered, tears of rage and fear welling in her eyes. "This is illegal. You can't do this." Everything in this binder is legally binding, fully audited, and already filed with the Securities Exchange Commission as of 8 a.m. this morning, my lead attorney replied flatly. Furthermore, based on the forensic audit conducted over the last 90 days, evidence of systemic embezzlement, falsification of board minutes, and fraud has been handed directly to the State Attorney General's office. The side doors opened. 2 plainclothes officers walked into the boardroom. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. Her sister burst into hysterical sobs, trying desperately to delete photos from her phone, while my sister-in-law was formally read her rights in front of every major investor and competitor in the industry. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she looked at me, begging with her eyes for a shred of mercy. I quietly closed my binder, stood up, and looked her dead in the eye. "I told you thank you the day you threw me out," I said quietly, "because if you hadn't locked that door, I never would have opened this one." 6 months later, the dust has completely settled. My former company was fully liquidated, its viable logistics assets absorbed under my new firm, which now leads the regional market. The employees who stood by silently while I was marched out were replaced with a team built on integrity and mutual respect. My sister-in-law was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison following a plea bargain for financial fraud, her personal assets liquidated to pay back the millions she owed to the trust. Her sister works as a junior associate at a collections agency, paying off legal fees. I don't hold anger toward them anymore. Anger is a fire that consumes the person holding it. Strategy, however, is a cold, precise tool. They thought they were stripping me of my dignity, but all they really did was hand me the exact leverage I needed to take back everything that was mine. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? Tell me your story in the comments.